Welcome, we're joined by Shushan Karapetyan, the Deputy Director of the USC Institute of Armenian Studies. Shushan, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
So, Shushan, Armenia is in a state of war, but also in a state of national mobilization. When you walk around the streets of Yerevan, you see donation drop-off points, for example. But there is also a state of international mobilization for Armenians. And comparing this to the 90s and the April War is significant. Can you speak a bit about this?
I think there is I got here actually 2 days ago from Los Angeles, and the experience back home for me in Los Angeles, the experience traveling, and now these 2 days being here in Yerevan, there's been an unprecedented mobilization, both locally and globally, that at least I in my lifetime haven't experienced. I think on the one hand, it's very somber and very alarming, but on the other hand, the kind of energy and invigoration that I'm seeing, again, I'll have to use the same word, is unprecedented.
And you mentioned you came to Armenia a couple of days ago. En route to Armenia, did you see or meet Armenians that were coming in the context of this war going on?
Absolutely. Even the day before we left for LAX, I went grocery shopping in Glendale at a local grocery store. And when they found out that we were en route to Armenia, first of all, they didn't allow us to pay. But more importantly, the owner of the local store pulled my husband and myself aside, handed us the keys to his house here in Yerevan, and said, if you find a family that's in need, find a home for them. This is a home. Use this place. So I think everyone's trying to figure out how they can be useful. And then when we flew through Paris, there was an entire flight full of diasporan Armenians coming to Armenia to do whatever they think they're capable to do. There were veterans from the war in the 90s who were coming back to go. And the mood was, I'm going without return. There were diasporan Armenians who had never been to Armenia, who were coming because they felt this call to be here. There were people who were coming with medical aid. There were people who were coming with technical expertise. There were people who had, again, like that grocery store owner, who have homes here, who are coming to arrange for displaced families to be settled in their homes. That feeling of we're being called and we need to do something, each of us within our own capabilities, I can't describe that feeling. That's been a very, very unique experience.
Many diasporans in the United States, I mean 2020 has been a year of pandemic, of lots of turmoil in US politics, and now many are observing a war from afar. You have used the term Diasporan Paralysis. What would your message be to many of those diasporans who are feeling helpless and detached from what's going on?
Yeah, especially in the United States, I think the situation is, I want to say, much more severe. I think globally, everybody's been struggling to deal with the pandemic, the kind of psychological, mental health stresses of the fears, the anxieties, the isolation, the loneliness. But what I've been feeling from my Armenian American friends and colleagues is that there's just been too much. So the pandemic, the kind of political situation in the US with the elections coming up, the protests in the US, the Black Lives Matter movement, and now with the outbreak of war, literally people have used the word I'm crumbling, that my state of mental health is not well. And so just in the last couple of days, I heard this phrase, diasporan paralysis, this literally feeling paralyzed and feeling helpless. My message to them would be, wake up. We need you. We don't need you in a state of paralysis. You have a role to play, whether that's raising awareness through information or fundraising or moral support. Just yesterday, I met with a couple of displaced families from Artsakh, and their immediate needs were taken care of. They had shelter, they had food, you know, they needed some material things, but most of all, I think they needed moral support. So if nothing else, your state of paralysis, you can do something. You can do something. I fully understand and recognize the feeling of being helpless, but you are not helpless. There is a role for each and every diasporan, and that can range, again, anything from getting the contact of a displaced family and checking in on them, to raising awareness, to fundraising, to whatever set of, you know, all these men are being deployed right now in every sector. Someone needs to fill in for those gaps. I know recently on a network of repatriates, I noticed a conversation about maybe some kind of a skill exchange. So if someone has been deployed and that skill set is now necessary, maybe a diasporan Armenian can fill that gap. So there are many ways to kind of break out of that paralysis.
We saw Armenians in Los Angeles shut down a freeway to raise awareness and as a protest. But this did gain a lot of coverage. Do you think tactics like this are effective in these times?
You know, yes. And for those who might have been cynical or who might have viewed it as a nuisance, I think the results proved that it was effective. Within hours after the protest, not every, but many news outlets were reaching out for urgent interviews. So Armenians are very vibrant, very visible, especially in the Los Angeles community. They are integral to all of the institutions. So I think it was a very strategic, tactical move, and it did indeed result in lots of coverage.
Despite many not knowing about the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, I was interested to know, when you were in the US, what sort of responses were you getting from non-Armenians?
I think Armenians and non-Armenians some Armenians and obviously many non-Armenians were not well informed. You know, Armenians understand that there's a conflict, but it's a very nuanced situation. Especially younger Armenian Americans, you know, the youth or young adults, they're not very well informed about the reasons behind the conflict, the kind of historical, political background. And in terms of non-Armenians, I think their initial response was our Armenian friends, our Armenian neighbors, our Armenian coworkers are struggling. They're going through something. So, for example, I had a neighbor, you know, text me saying, I heard something's going on. Are you okay? So they, you know, I'm not sure how well they understand what's going on, but they know something's going on, and, you know, checking in on you. Is there anything I can do? Or, for example, I have two children. My 13-year-old was doing a Zoom class, and the teacher at the beginning of class started asking the students about what's going on and how they're doing, and admitting that she doesn't know very well what's going on, but understands that these kids are struggling with something. Both Glendale Unified School District and Los Angeles Unified School District have reached out to their students, to the families for counseling, have released statements. So the response has been one of support, one of understanding that something is going on. Now, I think what needs to be done, and what, for example, the USC Institute of Armenian Studies is doing, and certain other organizations and institutions, is giving reliable sources of information, of context, of background for people to understand what's going on and why it's so consequential, and why for both the Armenian community in Southern California, but also the Armenian community worldwide, this is an existential crisis. I think that kind of context is essential right now. Accessible information for people to understand what's going on, the severity of what's going on, and also the international implications.
Well, in the past, Armenians have had many interethnic sort of scruples, but since this war started, much of that has halted. We have the dynamic between the Hayastansi and the Qarabağtsi, between the Halabtsi and the Beirutsi. Do you think this is a watershed moment for those sorts of scruples, if you would?
I do. I think in general, in moments of crisis, people tend to come together. And I think, you know, especially for a place like Los Angeles, that's such a cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic, multicultural city. You know, every ethnic group thinks they're the ones who have their intra-ethnic kind of foibles and scruples and divisions. And then, you know, you talk to the Korean Americans, to the Mexican Americans, and they all have those divisions. But I do think this is a watershed moment. And I think particularly because there's an interesting dynamic in Los Angeles where it's kind of a microcosm of the diaspora and of the Republic of Armenia, right? Because you have Armenians from all kinds of communities who are second diaspora. So the Iranian Armenians, the Lebanese Armenians, the Syrian Armenians who've come from one minority status to another. And then you have the Armenians from Hayastan, from the Republic of Armenia, who have come from majority status to minority status. And so those dynamics are very interesting. For example, we talked about protesting. We talked about, you know, participating in traditional community organizations. Typically, the Hayastansis, the Armenians from Armenia, don't take part in those because they don't have the diasporan profile, right? They don't have the diasporan angst, the fears of assimilation, the kind of volunteerism, the community organizing. But what has struck me at this moment is that all of those intra-ethnic divisions, differences, outlooks have disappeared. Everybody is united, whether it's fundraising, whether it's protesting, even generations, right? Typically, you have generational differences in how certain things are handled. I think across communities, across intra-ethnic cohorts, across generations, everyone has united at this moment.
And I know this last question is a bit of a repetition, but interestingly, the diaspora as an entity is seen as a major supporting bloc for the Armenian side. Azerbaijan and Turkey also characterize it as this major supporting bloc. And what's interesting also is that they have diasporas themselves, but they never get that sort of characterization that Armenians do. How do you see the support coming from the diaspora? Is it purely financial or is it something more?
I think one, the kind of longevity of the diasporan leg of Armenian existence, right? The diaspora is not a post-genocide phenomenon. Even well before the genocide, there was an Armenian diaspora, and the kind of philanthropy built into that, that's also has a very long precedence in history. But I don't think in the last 100 years there has been this kind of mobilization for this kind of an existential battle. So I think the diaspora support, obviously in terms of financial support, is extremely significant, but it's more than financial. Within the 2 days I've been here, I've had calls and texts from friends all over the world saying, I'm buying a one-way ticket and I'm coming. And I'm not sure how I can be useful, but I'll figure it out when I get there. Instead of people running away, they're coming. I think that sense of energy and mobilization and spirit is something that really is difficult to articulate. I also think diasporans live in a very different reality. For the average diasporan, there is a day-to-day practice of performing Armenianness because you don't have it as a default like you do here in Armenia. And I think this war has challenged them to turn that performance into action. And I think they've risen to the challenge.
Well, Shushan, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.